Okay. Okay, should we get started? Yeah, should we get started? Good. Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. So we've been looking at for the last couple of weeks the Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the Prophet alayhi salam's journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, his ascension into the heavens, and going through kind of the accounts in detail. Last week we had to cancel class. I appreciate a lot of you checked in. My father was hospitalized unexpectedly. He's doing okay, alhamdulillah, and he was discharged a couple of days later. Just keep him in your dua if you can. He had a pretty bad stroke in 2018 that left him paralyzed on the right side of his body and without the ability to speak. And so now when there's any kind of condition that comes up or complication thereafter, quite often, like his doctors will recommend in certain instances, kind of going to the ER. It was really crazy because the hospital was overflowing with people. I don't know if any of you work in hospitals or have been in the hospital as of recent, but my family lives in New Jersey. My parents live with my older brother, and like literally the ER had nurses stations, and there was people just sitting in chairs like this, on like side by side because of the sheer number. And they said, you know, the beds in the entire hospital were all taken up. So it was really, really, I don't know. And then people here were saying in New York is very similar. But what was crazy was like the number of people who were there alone. Like there was nobody there with them in the ER. Like they were just there by themselves, kind of with with nurses and, you know, whoever else. Which is one of the reasons why like our tradition teaches us to visit the sick, you know, and not just understandings like the people that we know, but also the people that we don't know, right? And you've heard me talk about this a lot in different ways, right? But there was just a lot of people there that were by themselves, and nobody was really checking in on them. And you can imagine if you've ever been like very ill, what that feels like. If you're in your apartment, you're in a dorm by yourself. You can imagine you're sitting in a hospital now, and there's a more critical situation, and there's still fundamentally nobody there with you, right? And it's not that there's a shortage of people who could be there. They're not kind of attuned to that as an idea that like this is something we willfully do or find kind of a sense of self, you know, like I want to be the person who visits people in the hospital. Do you know what I mean? As much as I want to be like a doctor, or I want to be married, or I want to be a parent, like I want to be the person who like goes to these places, you know? But I apologize, we canceled last week, and we're just gonna kind of pick up and go through it again. So we're reading through this text that's collated that talks about like the various hadith and ayat that speak about al-Isra wal Mi'raj, and with a recognition that there's debates on kind of what the chronology is to this. Do you know, does it happen in what particular order? Like hadith that kind of come together, giving us an outline, some narrations that we find in the Seerah literature have different levels of authentication than you would when you're looking at hadith texts, and to draw principles, you know, that we pull like legal rulings, theological doctrinal principles from. So we're going through it in its entirety, piece by piece. It's a very vividly described incident that takes place in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. We said that this was something that came place after now close to 12 years in a Meccan period of Islam, where there's been a lot of tribulation and a lot of persecution. So it's not just like the instance of Taif or the passing of Abu Talib or Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, but also, in addition to those things, the difficulties that he experiences, alayhi salam, through public propagation of revelation, persecution, seeing his friends and family members being boycotted, beaten, abused, even killed. They like are for 2 to 3 years kind of in self-exile in a valley with nothing, quite often eating like leaves of trees, boiling leather in this boycott that takes place not for a week, but for a good chunk of time, 2 to 3 years, and it becomes debilitating on a lot of them, you know? And so the Prophet ﷺ, within this prism, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that indeed with hardship there comes ease, indeed with hardship there comes ease. Like this journey is said to be a sense of ease that comes from these difficulties. And we talked about a bunch of different things leading into this, right? Like how one of the forms of worship the companions would engage in was the waiting for ease in a moment of difficulty, right? Like if some hardship befell, they anticipated, because of Allah's promise, that some ease would kind of come through from that, right? And the different parts of like this narration that we've looked at so far, the angel Jibra'il coming, washing the Prophet ﷺ's heart, filling it with kind of intellect and wisdom and faith and all of these things. We talked about how he prayed in these different places where these different prophets had been. And so we're going to kind of continue and get through as much as we can, and then probably pick up again next time, inshallah, with what we don't finish, right? And so I'm going to read through kind of where we've been so far, just so people can kind of get an idea, because it kind of builds into some of it. And so the Shaykh writes, in the name of Allah, most merciful, most beneficent, blessings and peace upon the Messenger of Allah and his family and companions. As the Prophet, upon him blessings and peace, was in al-Hijr at the house, lying down at rest between two men, Jibra'il and Mikail came to him. With them was a third angel. They carried him until they brought him to the spring of Zamzam, where they asked him to lie on his back, and Jibra'il took him over from the other two. The roof of my house was opened, and Jibra'il descended, another version says. He split the Prophet's chest from his throat to the bottom of his belly. Then Jibra'il said to Mikail, bring me a vessel of water from Zamzam so that I will purify his heart and expand his chest. He took out his heart and washed it 3 times, removing from it what was wrong. Mikail went back and forth to him with the vessel of water from Zamzam 3 times. Then he brought him a golden vessel filled with wisdom and belief, which we emptied into his chest. He filled his chest with hilm, intelligence, patience, and good character, knowledge, certainty, and submission. Then he closed it up. He sealed it between his shoulders with the seal of prophethood, right? And so we said here, like removing something from someone's heart also requires a second step of like filling it up with something that's good, right? It's not just about letting it out, but now when you release something, you want to replace it not with what you released, but putting something beneficial in replace of it. Then he brought the burak, handsome-faced and bridled, a tall white beast, bigger than the donkey but smaller than the mule. He could place his hooves at the farthest boundary of his gaze. He had long ears. Whenever he faced a mountain, his hind legs would extend, and whenever he went downhill, his front legs would extend. He had 2 wings on his thighs, which lent strength to his legs. He bucked when the Prophet came to mount him. Jibra'il put his hand on his mane and said, are you not ashamed, O Burak? By Allah, no one has ridden you in all creation more dear to Allah than he is. Hearing this, he was so ashamed that he sweated until he became soaked, and he stood still so that the Prophet mounted him. The other prophets used to mount the Burak before. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib said, it is the beast of Ibrahim, which he used to mount whenever he traveled to the sacred house. Jibra'il departed with him. He placed himself on his right while Mikail was on his left. In Ibn Sa'ad's version, the one holding his stirrup was Jibra'il, and the one holding the reins of the Burak was Mikail. They traveled until they reached a land filled with date palms. Jibra'il said to the Prophet, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibra'il said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in At-Taiba, and the migration will take place there. The Buraq continued his lightning flight, placing his hooves wherever his gaze could reach. Jibreel then said again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in Madian, a city on the shore of the Red Sea bordering Tabuk near the valley of Shu'aib, at the tree of Musa, where Musa alayhi salam rested from fatigue and hunger during his flight from Fir'aun. The Buraq continued his lightning flight. Then Jibreel said again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed at the mountain of Sina, where Allah addressed Musa. Then he reached a land where the palaces of Syria became visible to him. Jibreel said to him, alight and pray. He did so and remounted. Then the Buraq continued his lightning flight, and Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in Bethlehem, where Isa ibn Maryam was born. And this is where we had stopped last time. We talked about some of the wisdom that the Prophet prayed in these places where some of these messengers of God, that out of the 120 plus thousand that he's going to pray with at Jerusalem, these were ones who also went through particular types of struggles and difficulties, right? But the ease that's coming is in a mode that is getting him to a place where he's also finding kind of healing. You know, he's not alone in this. He has others who might not be his contemporaries, but they've gone through things that he's gone through also. They faced persecution for their beliefs, right? They were mistreated. They didn't have thousands and millions of followers, many of them, and many of them were facing physical harm, emotional harm, a lot of difficulty, and the Prophet's able to connect to them in these ways. And so we're going to pick up from here. So this is kind of where we stopped last time, in where we're at with Al-Isra and Mi'raj, in this text that kind of collates everything. And so everything from here is kind of new. As the Prophet was traveling mounted on the Buraq, he saw a devil from the jinn who was trying to get near him holding a firebrand. Everywhere the Prophet turned, he would see him. Jibreel said to him, shall I teach you words which, if you say them, his firebrand will go out and he will fall dead? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes. Jibreel said, say, أعوذ بوجه الله الكريم وبكلمات الله التامة التي لا يجوزهن بر ولا فاجر من شر ما ينزل من السماء ومن شر ما يعرج فيها ومن شر ما ضراء في الأرض ومن شر ما يخرج منها ومن فتن الليل والنهار ومن توارق الليل والنهار إلى طريق يطرق بخير يا رحمن. That I seek refuge in the face of Allah, the most generous, and in Allah's perfect words, which neither the righteous nor the disobedient overstep, from the evil of what descends from the heavens, and the evil of what ascends to it, and the evil of what is created in the earth, and the trials of the night and the day, and the visitors of the night and the day, except the visitor that comes with goodness, O merciful one, Ya Rahman. Here now the Prophet ﷺ is engaged in already what is a pretty remarkable occurrence. He has to have the wherewithal to be able to understand realities and realms of existence that are not what we experience day to day. So aside from traversing now this plane on the Buraq, in the midst of it, he's going to start being shown different things, and he is still in a place where, firstly, we are given indication, just like from the prior instances, the angel Jibreel is asking the Prophet questions, and he's still teaching him things. Do you see? So the angel doesn't say, like, what do you say in this moment? But he says, would you like me to teach you something in this moment? And the dynamic of what they have is still a student-teacher relationship. How old is the Prophet at this point in time? Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj is happening in year 12, arguably, of like the prophetic kind of periods, right? So what's the prophet's age? He's 52 years old. You know what I mean? Even if you said, oh, it's lunar years, right? He still lived 5 decades in his life. And he is the prophet of God. He is the messenger of God. He is the last messenger of God. He's the last messenger that the angel just told the Buraq, you have never been ridden by somebody who is more dear to Allah than this person. And the prophet is still learning from his teacher. Do you see? The continuity of a learning experience is something that doesn't come and go at matters of convenience, but one of the things that Islam as a tradition is built upon, if we were to identify pillars of it, is knowledge. And not just the acquisition of rote memorization, but through knowledge, like knowing things. Do you get what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? Like, it's not that I have the knowledge that honesty is good, but through the knowledge that honesty is good, I know that honesty is good. Right? I'm not just storing information. I am in a place where my acquisition of it then informs also my comprehension, my understanding. So it becomes a source of knowing, which becomes a source of contentment. Think about in your life, your routine that you spend daily, weekly, monthly, and when did learning and knowing that was beneficial like come to a halt? Or what came in the way? Or when was there regularity to it? And where did the regularity stop? And you can't have this conversation in a mode of self-deprecation, but in a mode that understands that foundational aspects of Islam as a religion are things that arguably a lot of us weren't necessarily given at junctures that we could have been given to them, but also we kind of took a pause after a certain period of like learning and knowing, or assume that we like know everything, right? He's 52 years old, he's the messenger of God, and he is in a place where he has like an elevated status that he is also aware of, but he's still in a place where when somebody says to him, the angel Jibra'il, shall I teach you? He says yes. And there's an intrinsic link between contentment and knowing. The way we are wired, like we want to know the answers to questions. And when we don't know, even if we have knowledge, right? Like you have knowledge that there is an afterlife. May Allah make us people of Jannah. But just because you have knowledge that there's an afterlife, it doesn't mean you really know that there's an afterlife based off of how you demonstrate choices in relation to that knowledge. If I was in a place where I tried to find meaning and contentment, right? I'm not discounting anybody's emotional exhaustion or stress. The world is heavy. Do you know? But it makes a big difference, not just that I have knowledge, but I know that there's a day of judgment where Allah is going to put everything into balance. I can still be sad at inequity. I should still be upset at injustice. But let them have this world. We live for a bigger world. And contentment, which is not about fleeting happiness, that I'm just laughing and giggling. The Prophet was the most contented people, and he still got sad. He still cried. Contentment is about a balance that coexists with happiness as much as it coexists with grief. It coexists with joy as much as it coexists with sadness. But part of that contentment is knowing. And you can't know if you stop gaining knowledge. Think about what this religion roots itself in. A revelation that was in its onset an oral tradition, but was about the conveyance of information that was a necessity in a society and a world that was slowly becoming all the more devolved in its sense of ethics. How does a human get to a place where, as an individual, let alone as a collective society, they justify the burying alive of daughters? This is what a Meccan society was. And there was people who stood in kind of opposition to this, but their knowing through their own was not going to suffice. Like, people needed to have something that guided them towards not moral relativism. When you have empirical based understandings of things, you might be able to answer questions of how and what, but they can't explain why. When I go to the hospital and the doctor's there talking to me about my dad and telling me stuff, my dad's a doctor, my uncle's a doctor, a lot of my cousins are doctors, right? I'm like the brown guy who was the brown failed dream, no doctor, you know? But growing up around doctors and growing up in like a medical family and visiting hospitals even now all the time, whether it's for my family or like people in our community or others that I go, a lot of doctors can't tell you why certain things happen in the ways that they do. They don't know. Even at the level of just like catalysts that take place on a scientific, they can't tell you why somebody responded in a certain way to something and somebody responded in a different way. You know? If you ever sat down with somebody who has like a wellness condition that they come to know of later in their life, it's a bittersweet moment. They're like, oh, I have ADD or ADHD. And they have to deal with that from the standpoint of reality, but then they can look back at a life lived and say, well, it makes sense why I did some of these things in this way. The information like brings contentment, you know? This religion posits itself on the idea that if you have purpose and objective, that can tell you, like, where did all of this come from? Why do we really like exist in the ways that we exist? It's not just so you can like give khutbahs or answer questions at Sunday school or live in a world that is hyper legalized as a Muslim, that's your experience with Islam, but the goal is that it brings like inner balance and contentment. This is what I'm supposed to be living for. Do you see? And it doesn't happen sometimes just by osmosis or kind of organically. Sometimes you got to take the effort to go and learn stuff and then be in a place where you broaden in that knowledge base through a prism of some of these things. So your prophet, who is being told like moments before on this journey, indirectly, as the angel Jibreel chastises the Buraq, that there's no one more dearer to Allah than this person, he still is in a place where he wants to know more. He wants to learn more. Do you understand? What gets in the way of our learning? With a regularity that isn't like, learning isn't always just like memorize, right? Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he was sitting in a majlis where someone was teaching something, and as they were teaching something, someone came to ask a question, and the people there didn't know how to answer the question. And Abu Hanifa answered the question, and the man who was teaching the class said, how did you know the answer to that question? And he said, I just used what it was that you were just teaching to everybody right now. He wasn't putting the person down, but he knew how to engage it from different vantage points. Do you see? Right? The idea that this verse only means this, there's not a lot of verses like that in the Quran. Reflection, tadabbur, like contemplation, being in a place where if you only engage Islam from the time you're like 5 to 10, you don't have the mental faculties and capacities to think critically and deeply about something. How can you ascertain in that moment like convictions and values that inform themselves through a theology that's not meant to be iterated from the tongue, but believed through the heart? Do you see? And then the Prophet, he believes in this stuff, right? But my belief in it is, well, am I reading the Ayatul Kursi after every prayer? Before I go to bed, do I read the Ayatul Kursi in the last verses of Surah Baqarah and the Quls? Am I going to bed in a state of wudu, right? I have knowledge that like praying certain prayers is good, but the disconnect between like the knowledge and the wisdom to implement that knowledge is like knowing through the knowledge. And one of the ways knowing stops is like when the acquisition of knowledge stops. It's not also just like sacred knowledge, Quran and Hadith only. Everything that you learn in pursuit of your careers, your professional ambitions, your like personal lives, right? All like beneficial knowledge comes from Allah. He is Al-Alim. So if you work in certain industries, one can't say that's not beneficial knowledge, but you just have to know the source of that is still coming from the divine. And allowing for that to then be understood, like, what do I know through this knowledge that I have? Do you get what I'm saying? What gets in the way, like for some of us, right? And think about it broadly, you know? There's just too much information on the internet. I Google something and a million things pop up. I don't know like how to navigate some of that. Language barriers, I don't know where to start. But what I like for us to think out, right? Why do you think it would be beneficial? Like you have to incentivize it for yourself. To have a regular mode of just learning. What are the things that I would gain from that? And what are the things that make it difficult to do? Does the question make sense? So we can turn to the person next to us. If you don't know names, share some names, right? Like what would be the gains of having some regular like kind of mode of just learning? And what gets in the way for me from like learning to my capacity? Do you know? Like what inhibits that? If we can turn to the persons next to us and kind of talk about it, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay. So, what are some of the things we're talking about? Like, what would be the benefits of actually having continuous learning? Like, what are the gains from that? And then what gets in the way? What do we discuss? Yeah.
So something that tends to get in the way for me is like lack of consistency, because I tend to do things in like big spurts. So like I'll like get super interested. Let's say I want to read more Seerah, like I'll do it for like 5 hours a day, like for 3 days, and then burn out, and then like won't revisit it again for like 6 months. Um, and then like I know that it's better to break it up into like, okay, if you want to like be more connected to the Seerah, you should read for 10 minutes a day instead of doing 5 hours, because you realistically won't have that much time all the time. But then I almost have this fear that like, oh, just you can't commit to things, so then I just end up not doing it at all, because I'm like, you're not going to continue this.
Yeah. And that's very, like, real experience that a lot of us have, right? Like, life gets in the way, we get exhausted, burnout, other types of things, do you know? And there's ways to address this stuff, but acknowledging it and putting it out there so then you can determine how do I create some kind of gradual progression. Do you know what I mean? What else? What else comes up? Like, why is this a beneficial thing to have learning or to know stuff? Because you're not going to do something if you can't incentivize it. Do you know what I mean? Right? Is it? Is it like a good thing to do? Why? Why is it a good thing to do? Yeah.
It's good because it expands your perspective, your knowledge base. I caught the last bit of the last lecture, and she was mentioning how sometimes we can be really self-focused and self-centered in our thought processes, and our lens becomes so self-driven. I think learning and expanding our viewpoints allows you to realize that this world is not just about you and your own lens and viewpoint. So it's an expansion that I think is necessary.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can think about it a different way. Let's just go with the assumption that learning is good, right? Okay? Who benefits from you not knowing something?
Your oppressor.
Huh?
Your oppressor.
Yeah. Who else? Like, anybody else benefit from you not knowing something? Shaitan. Yeah. Anyone else? So think about it in the prism of people who benefit from you not knowing a lot. Who benefits from you not knowing about all the garbage you put in your body when you're eating certain things? The people who are selling it to you. Who are people who benefit a lot from you not actually knowing what Islam says about things? People who manipulate and weaponize it against you, right? The number of people I sit in my office with constantly, and they're like distraught. And then they say at the end of it in tears, my mom and dad told me, like, if I do this, I'm going to hell, right? My husband said to me, like, this is not Islam, this and that. And it's clearly, like, just not what the religion says. Do you see? When you are in a place as a minority and you are in institutions of education rooted in pedagogies that teach you noble things, it's noble to become a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, like whatever it is that you pursue, those are noble things, but there's gaps in it because it's teaching you still through a curriculum that enables you to be a worker of some kind. It's not telling you how to be a thinker. It's not giving you kind of that bridge of knowing, and you're exerting now a good chunk of your energy to be pursuant of things that are just about the acquisition of what's worldly, and then it gets pick and chosen like what you're taught. If you went to school in this country, right? Think about the way in the United States of America African American experience is taught to you. They teach you slavery as if it's like not a big deal. They make you dress up as pilgrims and celebrate Thanksgiving between like do you know what I mean? Who benefits from you not knowing and not being exposed to certain realities? Who benefits from controlling what you know? So when you're constantly stuck in a device and you're scrolling and scrolling, even if it's not conscious, the visual consumption is storing itself And the command to lower your gaze is not there. But what it's yielding is not knowledge, it's yielding ignorance. Who benefits from our ignorance? Who wants you to not pick up a book, but would rather have you pick up a phone and stare at it, right? And you have to think about it in that way. Do you get what I mean? And being able to understand, like, what is it that people do to be able to deprive the growth of communities, and why we have hadith that say towards the end of time, one of the things that are going to be lifted from our community are people of knowledge. Do you get what I mean? Like, if I know how to exist according to your way of life, and I'm willing to sacrifice my way of life, like, what did I really gain in exchange for the return of some dollars? And humility is important here. The messenger of God is willing to acknowledge that there's still things that he doesn't know. The biggest, like, thing that gets in the way is that, like, I think I know everything. You know how many people, like, not only might have imposters, whatever else, right? But the number of people who think everybody else is dumber than they are. And are in a place where they're constantly, like, negating people in terms of their perspectives and ideas and opinions. And then people hear it and they internalize it, right? When you tell your mother that she doesn't know what she's talking about again and again and again, she doesn't understand, she doesn't get it, what kind of mindset do you think is building up within her? One that's empowering, or one that says, my son, my daughter thinks I'm an idiot? Here you can also take from this that the Prophet ﷺ is willing to actually learn things from people. And the moment in and of itself is never like a moment that is only the moment that you can learn, like in a classroom environment. So the angel Jibreel is teaching him pedagogically through a teaching tool that says, do you see this? This is what happens. The Prophet does the same thing. It's not that they're all gathered together always, but when you are in a place where you call upon Allah as Rabbul Alameen, you're not calling upon Him as Rabbul Dunya, like you're calling upon Him as the Rabb of the A'lam. The A'lam is rooted in ilm. So every step can be a step of knowing. So when the Prophet is like speaking to his companions in the aftermath of a battle, where he sees a mother and a child separate and they embrace, do you think this mother would ever harm her child? Do you think she would ever throw him in a fire? No, of course not, Messenger of God. Allah is more merciful than a mother is to her child. The Prophet knows like when to teach and how to teach. But he's also learning like teaching techniques from the angel Jibreel. Do you see? You gotta like read books, and it might seem as if that's like an obvious thing, but how many books do you read in a month, in a week? And not because the book is a part of like your job or your profession. You can learn the ideas of luminaries through libraries that don't even charge you anything to do it. The only thing that is going to cost you is like the incentivizing of spending time in pursuit of something. In this religion, like the Prophet even teaches Abu Huraira that he learned something from Shaitan. When he's guarding the Bayt al-Mal and Shaitan comes to steal from it, right? We don't have to go into the entire detail of it, but every time he says, let me go when he's caught, and then the third time, the Prophet each time is telling him, like, you know, like he preemptively asks what happened before he was told. And then on the third instance, the man says, like, if you let me go, I'll teach you something. And Abu Huraira says, okay, he affirms this. He says, if you recite Ayatul Kursi, it'll keep the jinn, the shayateen, away from you. And so the Prophet asks him what takes place. And Abu Huraira says, this is what happened, and this is what he told me. And he says, indeed, this man's a liar, but he told you the truth. Like, this was Iblis, right? But like, Abu Huraira learned something from Iblis. How can an adult not learn something from a child once in a while? Do you know? How could somebody who's rich not learn something from somebody who's poor? Right? Like, you can't have these kind of vision modifiers that blind you to realities. But it's hard if you're not even looking to learn in the first place. To think that part of my growth and self-actualization is in a place where like I can deepen in beneficial knowing that's not just the rote memorization of something, but through it I also reflect and I contemplate and I try to understand and I find contentment through knowing. Do you know? You think the angel Jibreel taught the Prophet ﷺ this and then the Prophet didn't use it? But you take what you know and you act on what you know and you keep these close, and this is one of the ingredients to contentment. When you get thrown into a frenzy of why is the world so overwhelming and why is it so tough and why is this hard and why is that hard? But like, do you do the stuff that you know? And not just about like, are you praying your prayers and fasting and whatever, that also, but like, you know you are not as irritable and angry when you sleep more at night, right? Why do you sleep in the way that you sleep? Who benefits from you sleeping with nonsensical understandings of sleep? It's not you, right? But then the guy that you got to buy 12 cups of coffee for to stay awake, the person who you're paying a monthly subscription to binge watch something, right? The idea of it, the absence, I'm not saying like you don't have fun, but like know yourself and through what you know of yourself, act upon those things. Do you see what I mean? Right? The Prophet has somebody in his life. He even has someone in his life that's teaching him stuff, right? The other thing you want to understand is there's a difference between a professor and a teacher. There's people you could take information from, but the angel Jibreel and the Prophet ﷺ, they now have a bond that he sees him a little bit differently. He doesn't like have to even question it. He knows that the angel has his back. Like they're able to take from each other and he gains from him like senses of etiquette and character and all these kinds of things. Do you know? You gotta have somebody in your life that you look up to that actually makes sense to look up to. And people around you that you deliberately build into your friend circle that you gain positively from them, right? If all of your friends are idiots, why wouldn't you be an idiot? Right? Do you know? Sometimes you got to catch up to people. But if you're surrounded by people who validate and justify the monotony of a day, then it creates not just kind of plateauing, but potential stagnation. How did you get from where you are in your practice today from the last Ramadan that you just observed? What took you from a place that you were doing in Ramadan what you were doing, and you're not doing those things anymore? And you think about it. Do you see what I mean? Experiential knowledge is an aspect of knowledge, and it's hard to deny experiential knowledge. You just have to like build up within now a sense of what is it that gets in the way, how do I build that discipline, and how do I incentivize it? And the Prophet is taking from somebody and still has growth and continuity through this. What I'd like for us to do, take a quick minute, turn to the person next to you. What is it bringing up for you? What are you taking away from it? And then we'll come back and kind of continue with the text, but go ahead. If you don't know the names of the person sitting next to you, just share some names too. Just what are you taking away so far from what we're talking about? Yeah.
morning, wake up.
Okay, so what are some of the things we're taking away so far? What's coming up for people? Nothing? We just wasted the last 50 minutes of our lives. Yeah.
I definitely think that you brought up a really good point. It's really important for us to all, take the time to learn whatever we can. And I guess knowledge now is very accessible, more accessible than probably has ever been in human history. And this is a really good opportunity. We have so much tawfiq to learn so much. The generations before us, even during the Prophet's time, they, struggled so hard to learn things that they can only learn, what was at their fingertips, right? We literally have all the knowledge of human history available.
What are you doing?
Need to get some photos
For what?
some classes, post for the classes this week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the classes.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so I just feel like we have a really good opportunity, and Allah has definitely, brought us into this world at a specific time so that
Yeah.
we can, use the opportunity to learn a lot and to help as many people as we can. We just try to capitalize on it, like you said, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
We just had the conversation that I really like the part that you said who benefits from you not knowing, because you can kind of apply that to every aspect of your life. Who benefits, like you mentioned, sleep. Who benefits from you eating crap? It's gonna make you feel sick. So that going in with that kind of intention really changes the perspective of you, learning new things or going about your day differently.
Yeah. Right? And we all slip up, but the advantage of a slip up is that it also creates for us a sense of where we're currently at, boundaries, limitations. And where I'm at now doesn't mean that I have to be there forever, but knowing oneself is knowing Allah is an often quoted phrase in our tradition. And that sense of knowing has to come from a place of what's all the stuff that I got stored in my head to begin with? And why is that there? But fundamentally, we are in systems that were not built by us and they were not built for us. And there are people who take advantage of being in a place where our distractions lend towards ignorances that you don't want to think about ignorance as a pejoratively understood term, but identify ignorance as the absence of knowledge. And who gains from you not knowing, right? You know how many people we talk to and they're like, well, in my town, we don't have these problems. No, I mean, people have worked really hard to erase narrative of experiences. Do you know? You definitely have challenges around race and class. They're just putting millions of dollars and billions of dollars in getting you to believe otherwise, right? Just because I don't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Do you know? So here, the Prophet ﷺ is engaged in this. We can also see the recognition, there's other aspects of creation, right? There's angels, there's humanity, there's jinn, do you know? And so there's metaphysical existences. People sometimes talk about it a lot. Sheikh Sahib Webb, when he used to work here, he would do like an event every year around like this time because of Halloween. He'd talk about jinn and shayateen. I think he's doing something online, do you know? So we start to see here also on this kind of movement forward, like the angel Jibreel is giving the Prophet ﷺ a lot of insights into a lot of different things. As he continues, he says, they traveled until they reached a people who sowed in a day and reaped in a day. Every time they reaped, their harvest would be replenished as before. The Prophet said, O Jibreel, what is this? He replied, these are al-mujahidun, those who strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Every good deed of theirs is multiplied for them 700 times, and whatever they spend returns multiplied. Right? So he's being shown individual populations that also have benefit through action that they engage in. The particularities of this category, right? When you have a group that is identified by a quality, right? It is not like Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu is different from al-mu'minun. Do you see? Does that make sense? Right? Like if somebody is from the, muhsineen, then they're just categorically like people who are known with regularity to practice ihsan. You are from the muttaqeen, right? You are like categorically ones who are associated with taqwa versus just like on an instance, I had it for a moment. Do you see? It's like a prevailing characteristic that I'm identified through it as a normative part of what makes me who I am, right? So it's not that they engaged in struggle once, they were constantly struggling. Our religion, the ajr is in the struggle. I don't know why the ajr is in the struggle. I'm not God. Do you know? But the ajr is in the struggle, right? I have an office that's down the hall from here. Some of you have sat with me in it. We have another office that's the room right next door that sometimes I sit in. 2 doors away from it is a wudu room. And there's slippers here and there's slippers in the wudu room. My job doesn't make it difficult for me to get up and come to pray in this room. It's all within a 15-foot distance from one another, right? Alhamdulillah. How could the accomplishment of my prayer be compared to maybe one of you who's in an office that has no prayer space and people are hostile to Islam? Do you understand? Like I was speaking at a retreat and there's a brother who towards the end of it was saying very nice things to me about me. And he was then also in that mode contrasting himself and saying, I don't have strong iman. Look for an empty office space to pray in my prayers, and I'm so weak in my faith, and I'm worried about like people and what they'll say. And I was like, hey man, my job is to be Muslim. Nobody says anything to me about what I do and what I don't do. I was like, you, despite the hostile environment and the anxiety and all the difficulties, are still praying your prayers. That's iman. That's strong iman. And you see how shaitan gets you to see the opposite of what it is, right? I can't believe that person is praying in that dressing room in the middle of this and that. No, like even in the middle of all of this fitna, you try to go find a place where for moments you pray your prayer. That's strong iman. People sit and they say, I don't feel anything in my prayer. And it's like something is wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. You actually have strong iman because then you're not worshiping the feeling. You're worshiping Allah and you're doing it even when you're not feeling the feeling. How could I be measured as somebody who just, do you know? Do you know? So this is what you get, like when you struggle, is what the angel is showing him. And it doesn't always have to be explicit, right? That it's transactional. You can offer healing to people in ways that understand how they will receive things. The people who are struggling, the people of Mujahida, may Allah make us from amongst them. Like they're in a place where the analogies of the farmers are very deeply rooted in our tradition, right? So falah, like ultimate success, Jannah, is something that etymologically is rooted in the same word as for the farmer, right? And so what is this part of the hadith saying? They traveled until they reached a people who sowed in a day and reaped in a day, meaning they put down their seeds and then the harvest came in the day. And every time they reaped, their harvest would be replenished as before. Who are these people, right? O Jibra'il, what is this? He replied, these are al-mujahidun, those who strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Every good deed of theirs is multiplied for them 700 times, and whatever they spend returns multiplied, right? This is a principle in our religion that also you have to understand. They have a lot of stuff, right? They plant, and as soon as they plant, they get it in the same day. And when they spend of what they were given, they're given more in return. A really high maqam in our religion, like poor people have a high maqam in our religion. You don't want to ever look down at somebody who doesn't have money. The Prophet didn't have a lot of money. Having wealth also isn't a sign of stature in our religion. It doesn't work that way. But if you're a person who has a lot and gives a lot of it away in this way, they are the mujahidun, and how does he define them? Those who strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Every good deed of theirs is multiplied for them 700 times, and whatever they spend returns multiplied. So the wealthy person who has a lot of abundance, if you plant and the harvest comes, and as you harvest it, it's replenished, that means you have a lot of stuff, right? But they're spending in the way of Allah. So if you're a wealthy person who gives a lot of wealth away in the way of Allah, that's like a big station to reach. Because there's not a lot of rich people who give in the way of Allah. Do you know? They just don't. There's a lot of rich Muslims, do you, right? There is, right? There's like, all these lists that have the wealthiest people in the world, but they don't really have all the wealthy people in the world. Because there's a lot of Muslims who live in the world who have a lot of wealth. May Allah bless them in it, right? It's not about looking at it other than objectively. Do you know? And there's a lot of people who do good things with their money, but not in comparison to as many who don't. Do you see? And that's where the struggle comes in. It becomes difficult for me to sometimes embrace the struggle as a meaningful part of my journey. Why on a journey of healing is the Prophet being taught about people who are willing to give up things in the path of Allah, who are willing to struggle in the path of Allah? Do you see? Mujahida is like a central part to our spiritual growth. If you're not struggling and like willfully embracing, like struggle is part of the characteristics of this dunya, then it might not necessarily be resonating or registering the same way. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Does that make sense? And so, is it a struggle? Yeah, because like, if we don't get to it today, one of the people that they're going to talk about in a couple of paragraphs is going to be a group of people who, like, they're in a place where their heads are getting struck. And when they're described as to why their heads are getting struck, they're people who they didn't get up to pray from their pillows. These are the people whose heads were too heavy on their pillows to get up and fulfill the prescribed prayers. Do you know? Right? But like the pillow's not meant to be a distraction. It's meant to be a source of like appreciation. Like I'm so grateful that I have something comfortable to rest my head on. And the struggle is real. Like if it's warm in the covers and it's cold outside, it's a little harder to get up. Do you know? But also it goes back to like the framing of some of this section. Who benefits from you not knowing? Who benefits from you thinking that the prophetic way is something that's abnormal? That kindness, generosity, compassion, love, wisdom, these are not things for like people who want to succeed in the world. Who benefits from you not living with the idea that food for one is enough for two, or food for two is enough for four? You know? Who benefits from you not knowing the rules of zakah and making a spiritual act? Do you see what I mean? And so these people, they struggle, they go through it, and he is getting a tangible example of like, this is how it is that they then gain an increase from it. The Prophet then noticed a fragrant wind and said, "O Jibreel, what is this sweet scent?" He replied, "This is the scent of the lady who combed the hair of Fir'aun's daughter and that of her children. As she combed the hair of Fir'aun's daughter, the comb fell, and she said, 'In the name of Allah, may Fir'aun perish.' Whereupon Fir'aun's daughter said, 'Do you have a lord other than my father?' She said, 'Yes.' Fir'aun's daughter said, 'Shall I tell my father?' And she said, 'Yes.' She told him, and he summoned her and said, 'Do you have a lord other than me?' She replied, 'Yes, my Lord and your Lord is Allah.' This woman had 2 sons and a husband. Fir'aun summoned them, and he began to entice the woman and her husband to renege on their religion, but they refused. He said, 'Then I shall kill you.' She said, 'Be so good as to bury us all together in a single grave if you kill us.' He replied, 'Granted, and it is your right to ask us.' He then ordered that a huge cow made of copper be filled with boiling liquid, oil and water, and that she and her children be thrown into it. The children were taken and thrown in one after the other. The second and youngest was still an infant at the breast. When they took him, he said, 'Mother, fall and do not tarry, for indeed you are on the right.' Then she was thrown in with her children. Ibn Abbas said, 4 spoke from the cradle as they were still infants. This child, Yusuf's witness, Jurayj's companion, and Isa ibn Maryam, right? Meaning like 4 babies in our tradition spoke when they were babies, right? And so this child, and in Surah Al-Buruj, it speaks about the Ashab al-Ukhdud, right? And it's referring to this. And next time we have some more time, we could look at that a little bit. Jurayj was like a pious man who there was a woman who had, and a man who had committed adultery during the time of Jurayj. And Jurayj was like a pious man, and he engaged in a lot of worship. You know, his mother would call him and he wouldn't respond to the call because he was in worship. And his mother once said, like, may he not leave this world until he sees the face of a prostitute. You know, she was angry with him, right? So Jurayj, an instance comes around his time where there's a prostitute who has a relationship with a man and gets pregnant from it. And the man says, when you give birth to the child, tell everybody it's Jurayj's kid. And so they come now to like kind of punish Jurayj. And when they're taking him away, like he's like, what happened? And he said, this woman, this prostitute, like said, you are the one that got her pregnant. And he remembers like the words of his mother, right? And then the baby like speaks up and says that no, like he's innocent, and he highlights like who the actual person was, right? And the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, like we're more familiar with some of these things. We don't have to go into it. We'll pick up on this instance of this lady, but you want to understand like this woman's scent is what the Prophet is perceiving. Do you know? He's experiencing like visual interactions, but sensory perception in our tradition is not limited to just what we see. And so the notion is to move from being people who just see to people who perceive. You don't want to just hear, you want to be able to listen, right? It's not just that I eat, but I actually taste. I'm not just touching, but I feel. Do you know? And so now, as he's in this moment, he's picking up like the scent of something. Do you know what I mean? And it's a fragrant, beautiful scent. And the woman whose scent he's smelling, what do we know about her? She was a servant in the palace of Pharaoh whose job was to comb people's hair. That's what she did, right? You imagine like what kind of extravagant lifestyle these people have, that they have a person hired, but they probably didn't hire like a prince or a princess to comb somebody's hair. They're hiring like everyday people who are going to do this. Do you see? And the only thing that we know about her is that she expressed like Tawheed. And in a moment of like challenge, she stood up with her conviction. But it's not telling us her name or anything else about her. She was just a person who was combing this girl's hair. But like she also is given like ajr and reward, that this is the scent of this woman that you smell, right? Have you ever smelled something that's beautiful and it catches you off guard? Somebody's cooking something that reminds you of something. You pass by somebody and it's a perfume that reminds you of something. Or somebody just smells nice, right? Do you know? And once you get like closer and closer to it, it just is that much more kind of beautiful in whatever it is that it's leading you to. Do you see what I mean? So if this is just what the scent of what this woman is now kind of emanating from her in this otherworldly state, like what do you think her actual state is? Do you know? And it's not saying she was like the memorizer of a book. She was the one that taught like thousands of people. She was somebody who, what we know of her was that she combed people's hair. Do you understand? And having that as a recognition point as to like, well, what does goodness mean? Do you know, what does elevation mean? What does something mean in like an otherworldly state? And we'll kind of go through it a little bit more, but let's do this just in the interest of time. If we take a pause here and reflect on this, like when you get home, if you read Surah Al-Buruj, it's like a short chapter in the last juz of the Quran, and you go through it, like it's talking about these people, you know, who Fir'aun lines up in this way. So let's take a quick minute. You can turn to the person next to you. What are some of the things you're taking away from this conversation? What is it that's coming up? And then we'll just make like a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll wrap up for today. But go ahead. Okay, man, alhamdulillah, how's it going?
Alhamdulillah, everything okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you been?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
Your semester's going okay?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna try to transfer here,
Oh, no way.
so
Yeah?
yeah.
Why is that?
One because I don't know, I really love everyone here and it's very nice to come. But two because I realized that the same program I'm pursuing there, I have a better one here. So
What's this? What are you studying?
math and computer science.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
inshallah.
man, inshallah works out. Tawfiq,
I
inshallah.
need to ask you a question. Are you gonna be here for like 5 minutes afterwards? Or?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be quick, inshallah.
Sure.
Thanks.
Let's do it. Okay, so what are some of the things we're taking away today? What's coming up? Maybe we got one or two people. Then we'll just kind of announce a couple of quick things.
So you were talking about that process through his journey is he's learning things from the angels, but he's also teaching us through the way that he's getting all of these lessons from people who are like unrecognized. So it's like a prophet story. This woman we don't know anything about it except who's only mentioned in the Quran, but like it was very impressive to see how brave she was. Like even after the Buddha asking her, should I tell my father? She kind of pretended that oh, this was just like slip of the tongue. I didn't mean it, but she was like, no, it's fine. I could tell him, and she sacrificed her kids for that. And there is nothing that's stronger than a mother kid or child bond. But she didn't care about that, and this reminded me of Prophet Ibrahim when he was going to sacrifice his kid too. And so this simple woman just like would rise to the level of a prophet. It's like she's like really simple. So I think this is what I'm thinking that we could learn from people who are like very unrecognized. They're not. She's not the wealthiest. She's not the smartest, as you were saying. So I think this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I just to clarify, I didn't say she's not the smartest, right? But I just wanted to say that, right? But like like she is somebody who's combing somebody's hair in this place where the child speaks, like it's an infant child, right? She's holding the child the way a mother would hold a child against her chest. And she has hesitation, when you read like the tafsir, Surah al-Buruj, and you kind of look into these stories as to what's going on. Her hesitancy comes from like she's got a baby, and then the baby says like, "You're on the path of truth. Don't stop." Do you know? Um, but it's a very like powerful thing to think about this, right? And like, what do we need to know about her other than just like the reward that she's getting? Do you know? And what do I chase after then? Do you know what I mean? Any other thoughts? Like, what else do we take away? Yeah.
The story of this woman relates very much to people in Palestine right now, especially the women and children and their bravery and just their tawheed. Exactly, like they're standing up against oppression and oppressors who are so harsh and obviously on the wrong path, but they have so much tawakkul and so much just trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their deen and in their faith that it doesn't matter what's happening around them. They're just like and then this is just a reminder and just a comfort to them that their reward in Jannah is so beautiful that Rasulullah could smell the perfume of this woman.
Yeah, right. May Allah make us people of Jannah and make us the companions of those who are granted Jannah in this way. Like, really just like think about it though, right? But all of this, like, do you see how it ties together? Like, you have knowledge of an afterlife, but there's things that come in the way that prevent you from knowing those in certain moments. And the access of information is not just so that I can answer questions, but like I live in relation to the information that I have access to. Do you know? And here, like, you live in a world where you have examples of people that clearly have Iman Billah, right? May Allah make us from amongst them. I mean, it's not like anything. How, you've heard all the conversations of like people are seeing what the Palestinians do and they're so moved by them and it makes them want to convert to Islam and this and that, right? So, like, the idea is like aspirationally, I want to do that too. Do you know? Like, I want to have a sense that's not self-deprecating. So think about, why is the first thing the angel showing the prophet is how you protect yourself from shaitan? Do you know? How do you like protect yourself from these shayateen that are going to come and surround you? Because if you remember the description that was given here, right? The prophet was traveling mounted on the Barak. He saw a devil from the jinn who was trying to get near him holding a firebrand. Everywhere the prophet turned, he would see him. Do you see what I mean? It's like all around you, people are trying to pull you into what they think is beneficial for you, right? I'm not even saying like what you think is benefit. Like, do what Allah tells you is beneficial for you and align in that direction. But the idea of recognizing adversarial elements and how they manifest in certain ways. And so you equip yourself from the tools that make it hard to have like high iman in certain moments. Do you know? These guys are still reading their Quran, right? And it's not out of just rote memorization or like they see it. You know, the Quran is like shifa, it's healing, do you know? In the sense of like spiritual, emotional, and physical. Like it plays a role in wellness. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't read it, you're not going to get the healing from it that you can only get from its healing. So people are like, well, how do they have this strength? Like they pray their prayers. Like they really pray their prayers, right? Do you know? So they're being transformed by these things. It plays a role in it, and it has like a kind of not circular in the sense that it's argumentatively circular, but it's all connected to each other, right? They have iman in what Allah tells them, so they do what Allah tells them, and when they do what Allah tells them, it increases them in their iman, and it like keeps going. Do you know? And so this lady, like, very powerful like example. We don't have to know her name. We don't have to like have, we just got to know that she demonstrates to us what like courage and valor looks like, but also conviction, belief. Do you know? So when you go into an office and somebody tells you pretend like you're not Muslim, your professor tells you like you can't be Muslim in this space, you can say that that's not an easy thing to do, right? Like it's hard. It's not to make yourself hate yourself, but the ajr is in the struggle. Do you see? And she went up against like a lot of odds, and then look at the ajr that like she gets as a result of it. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? And all we know about her is that she was combing like this princess's hair. But what do we need to know other than like her reality is such that the fragrance that emanates from her is sweet enough that it catches like and the prophet, like you can't look at hadith in isolation, do you know? You got to understand them all together. So there was like a lot of things that the prophet told us to abstain from. But one of the things that we learn in the hadith is that the prophet loved like good fragrances, you know? And he would tell people like wear perfume. Do you know what I mean? And like lots of it, because people benefit from you smelling good, right? If I smell bad and I'm standing next to you in prayer, like you're not gonna, you know, you can be like, what is happening here, right? Like, you know what I mean? And circumstantially, like, yeah, like we don't want to look down on people. Are you like waiting to come into the room?
Sorry, yeah, is it?
You don't have to whisper, it's okay. But yeah, you can bring pizza, yeah.
So we just finished with a gathering down the hall, and we have like a lot of pizza left over. So if you want to stick around, we'll bring some in here.
You can bring it in here, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, do you need help?
Sam's help.
Yeah, okay, great. I forgot what I was saying, but like, oh yeah, the prophet liked perfume. He says it in the hadith, right? So we understand from that like he knows the difference between like a good scent and like a not good scent. Do you know? So something catches his nose, right? Like it's gonna likely be something that also is like a very beautiful thing. Do you see what I mean? Right? And you know, there's a lot of other stuff that you can like think about in those regards, right? Like the sins that we kind of engage in impact sometimes like, you know, the ways that like we smell like to the angels and other stuff, you know what I mean? Right? And so you can think about it in a lot of different ways. So why don't we take a pause here so I'm not just saying random stuff. I've had a long day. I don't know if anything that I said today had any type of resonance. If it didn't, I'm sorry. I told somebody in the elevator earlier that tomorrow was Jummah, and they were looking at me, you know, I said it to them like 3-4 times because I was very convinced that it was, and they were like, "You should probably go home and go to sleep." I was like, "Yeah." So just a couple of quick things. Next week will be in daylight savings time, so this will be like still at 7, but everything's going to be an hour earlier. So we will likely pray Isha like before we start. And Dr. Marwa's halakha, for those who join that, will start more promptly at 6 because Maghrib won't be coming in right before it starts. So as a result, we'll probably start closer to 7 than 7:15 or later than that. So just people kind of plan for that. And, you know, we'll pray Isha and then we'll start the halakha and try to wrap up a little bit earlier. Than we've been doing the last few weeks. We have like some. Do we have any events this week?
This week, the BMI on Friday, the Digital Sisterhood event.
Is it on Friday or Sunday?
Oh wait, Sunday. Yeah. Women's Initiative launch on Friday, and then yeah, the BMI Digital Sisterhood on Sunday.
Our women's initiative has a launch event this Friday. So one of the community-facing groups that we have that was open to like every segment, students, community members, etc., was a women's initiative that we didn't restart post-COVID as of yet. And so we're looking to revamp that or kind of reignite that rather. So you can come out on Friday night. There's going to be a dinner and like an event, right, starting at 6 o'clock. Yeah. And then on Sunday, the Digital Sisterhood, which is like a very well-known podcast, they're going to be coming here to do an event on Sunday. And that's open to, is that open only to women?
So there's two events that they're hosting. The intimate event, which is NYU students and alumni, is at 3, and then the community event, open to all women, is at 6.
But only women.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But we can explicitly say that.
Huh?
Only women, yeah.
No, but can these guys come?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. You said? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd say, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So just you should try to come to those things if you can, inshallah. I think we're gonna try to do some events next week in kind of anticipation or post like election as well, just that kind of brings people together and allows for people to kind of talk out whatever it is that is coming up for them. But look out for that. And because the election's on Tuesday, there's a chance that if things are really bad, inshallah they won't be, like we'll use this halakha time in lieu of that for a community kind of like healing space. But we'll let people know in advance what we do as best as we can. But there's a chance that that might not be the case. Yeah. Anything else people want to share with anyone before we wrap up? Yes, no. Okay, so if you want to grab some pizza, we prayed Isha before we started. So for those who didn't join us, if you want to pray on your own or make another Jama'ah, but we'll see everyone next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. What did you want to talk about? What did you want to talk about?
It's like kind of private.
Okay, we can go in my office. Okay.
Assalamu
Alaikum salam salam. You got this?
I am visiting from Canada.
Oh,
I'm here in a conference.